Before AEW came along, the main alternative for one-time WWE wrestlers in a post-ECW and WCW world was TNA. Though the promotion was rarely what you would call stable, it was always a place for established stars to ply their trade, and many made the jump over the years. Many, but not all, because try as Dixie Carter and co might, there were just some talents who they wanted but just couldn't have. Some of them came close, but eventually decided against life in the Impact Zone. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are 10 WWE stars TNA failed to sign. Join us. Number 10, Edge. Outside of a couple early day enhancement matches for WCW, Edge has basically been a WWE lifer. After making their names on the indies, he and best friend Christian were signed by WWE in the late 90s, grinded their way through Dory Funk Jr.'s training camp before being brought to television, ultimately becoming two of the breakout stars of the Attitude Era. Captain Charisma eventually left WWE for TNA in 2005, frustrated with his lack of main event opportunities, while Edge stayed and became the rated R WWE champion. A few years later, however, the Ultimate Opportunist did consider an opportunity with WWE's then closest competition. Edge revealed during a 2017 podcast appearance that his contract was coming up in either 2008 or 2009, and somebody from the Orlando outfit reached out to him to discuss money and schedule. The idea of working less dates for decent pay was appealing to the Canadian, whose beaten up body was very much feeling the effects of a taxing career. He was also attracted by the possibility of working with fresh opponents and meeting back up with Christian, but in the end turned it down as WWE felt like home. Number 9, Shelton Benjamin. There was a time when he was getting big victories over Triple H in the main event of Raw before having a long reign with the Intercontinental title that it looked as though Shelton Benjamin would break through and become a top-tier WWE superstar. It never quite happened though, as the Gold Standard had a damn good run, winning the IC, US and Tag Team titles, but never broke out into that main eventers club. When he was released in 2010, it was expected that he would be a man in high demand, and so it came to be, with the former amateur standout getting plenty of work for groups like Ring of Honor, as well as in Japan for New Japan Pro Wrestling and Noah. People likely expected him to show up in TNA, but it didn't transpire. After getting badgered with questions about it via social media, Benjamin addressed the situation on Twitter in 2015, writing that the two sides did have discussions and were eager to do business together, but that a mutually satisfactory agreement could not be reached. I can only assume that this means Shelton actually wanted to get paid on time. Number 8, Jim Ross. TNA didn't just try to sign wrestlers who had worked for WWE. Over time, they also welcomed into the fold former WWE referees, managers, production staff, and writers in a bid to improve their products. One person they tried to bring over who would have made a huge difference is Jim Ross. Good old JR was synonymous with the WWE product, having worked backstage as the top dog in talent relations and on camera as the lead announcer of both Raw and SmackDown. His time in the company had, at times, been tumultuous, however, with a couple of high-profile firings and some televised ribbing that had to rattle. TNA made a play for him in the early 2010s, with Eric Bischoff passing on the Hall of Famer's details to Dixie Carter, who flew him to the family ranch in Texas for talks. As Ross recently explained on his podcast, he enjoyed socializing with the Carters and did consider their offer, but ultimately declined because he left the meeting unsure about his job description, company structure, and the backstage atmosphere he would be walking into. Number 7, Rey Mysterio. When Rey Mysterio received his WWE release in 2015, every other wrestling organization in the world was salivating at the prospect of how many replica masks they could potentially sell to impressionable kids. In all seriousness, Mysterio is one of the best ever and was now a free agent, opening the door for many exciting possibilities. TNA/Impact were naturally interested and reached out to Ray about coming in. The two sides talked and Mysterio was receptive to working some matches, but didn't want to be tied down to a contract. That didn't work for TNA, who obviously wanted him locked into an exclusive deal. So the Master of the 619 did the indie and international thing instead, before showing up in Lucha Underground. A few years later, Impact was still trying to get their man and were negotiating to bring him in for their April 2018 tapings. However, according to reports, there was a snag during the finalization of the deal when Ray's representative Conan got involved, and the biggest little man was back in WWE full-time by the end of the year. Number 6. The Ultimate Warrior. When TNA was looking to launch in the summer of 2002, Jeff Jarrett tried to get as many major stars as he could in a bid to draw interest. The likes of Sean Waltman, Scott Hall, Ken Shamrock, BG James were all on board, but Double J reached out to many more performers who had been major deals in previous eras, such as Sid, who was prepping to make a comeback following the gruesome leg injury he suffered in a WCW ring, as well as big names like Chyna and Randy Savage. Jarrett also had a couple of conversations with the Ultimate Warrior, who hadn't been seen in the business since his disastrous run with WCW almost 4 years earlier. His pitch was the same one given to other talents such as Kurt Hennig and Rick Steiner, that TNA was a startup and they weren't looking for a long-term commitment, at that point simply attempting to do one show per week for 6 months. Warrior listened, but passed, deciding to put all of his energy into his burgeoning public speaking career. Oh boy. Number 5. Paul Heyman. According to Paul Heyman himself, TNA had been trying to get him on the phone since the day he left WWE in December of 2006. The man behind ECW didn't take their calls though, wishing instead to divorce himself temporarily from the wrestling business in order to focus on other endeavors. With the help of Spike TV, TNA finally managed to speak with Heyman in 2010. They were interested in bringing him in to help with the booking and creative direction of the company. Heyman was also interested in getting back into the Graps game, but as he revealed in later interviews, had some demands before he would sign up. According to him, he wanted complete control of the brand's direction, as well as a stake in the company and the ability to, should the time come, take the company public. The Carter family was ready and willing to acquiesce, but balked at Heyman's proposal to make TNA a more youth-oriented promotion and get rid of everyone on the roster over the age of 40. With the likes of Sting, Kurt Angle, Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair, and other influential figures on the roster at the time, Dixie wasn't prepared to sanction that and the two sides went their separate ways. Number 4. Ryback. You know, you forget that Ryback was, at one point, quite the big deal. These days, he's a walking joke, more likely to be mocked online for something dumb he said rather than anything positive he's done in the ring, but he really did catch on back in 2012 and had a hell of a run in WWE. Ryback, or Rizbiz as I like to call him, eventually got tired of the WWE grind and the backstage politics and the bad writing and the injuries, and well, he just got tired of WWE alright and decided he needed to get out. The gut reaction from many sections of the fanbase was that the big guy could be a big fish in a smaller pond, with TNA/Impact being the natural destination in their minds. Post-WWE, however, Ryback hasn't really done much wrestling at all, working a handful of indies but otherwise choosing to focus on his other business ventures. TNA/Impact were interested though, with Ryback stating that they did make an offer to him, but he had no interest with everything else that was going on at the time. Sadly, it looks as though an Impact run will never happen now, as Ryback is officially retired. Number 3. CM Punk. Oh, Pachiti, you silly boy. Punk actually was signed to TNA, so you are wrong, you big stupid idiot. Blah, 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 I hear you say. Look, obviously I know that Punk worked for TNA during their early years, before he decided to choose Ring of Honor over them when TNA issued an us or them edict in 2004. One of the ones that got away, the straight-edge superstar went on to become a massive star in WWE before sensationally walking out and quitting in early 2014. Fancying their chances over a decade on from Punk saying goodbye to them, TNA made a play for his services in late 2014. According to Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer, the deal sent via an intermediary was almost Hogan-esque, which presumably means they offered Punk a boatload of cash and promised they would bring his daughter Brooke in somewhere down the line. As it became obvious in the years after the Second City Saints WWE walkout, Punk was definitely not in the place to consider a return to the business at that point and didn't put a pen to paper. Something tells me ice cream bars weren't in the TNA budget. Number 2, Chris Jericho. Though Chris Jericho has been loyal to and had a strong relationship with Vince McMahon for over 20 years, he has also shown in recent times that he's not afraid to move on and work for someone else when necessary. He's shown up in New Japan and now flies the AEW flag, but things might have been different and he could have been singing the praises of Dixie Carter instead. When Jericho left WWE in the summer of 2005, TNA were rapidly gaining momentum and was soon able to attract plenty of big-time stars. With Y2J no longer tied to a WWE contract, publicly praising up-and-comers like Samoa Joe and AJ Styles, and living on the doorstep of TNA's home base of Universal Studios in Orlando, it was a no-brainer that TNA would attempt to bring him in. Fuel was added to the fire when TNA licensed a Fozzy song to use on a promotional video, and Jericho put a TNA logo on his website, the sexy troll. Though Jericho met Dixie and Jeff Jarrett for lunch in Tampa, he knew in his heart and mind that he would always go back to WWE and politely turn down their offer. Jericho, ever the savvy businessman, then helped leak details of the lunch in order to get a better offer from Vince. Number 1. Goldberg. When TNA were on the rise and trying their best to get as close to WWE as possible, a prevailing theory was that they just needed that one major mainstream star to take them to the next level. The idea being that if a Steve Austin or Brock Lesnar showed up in the Impact Zone, that the fans would flock and the money would roll in. They could never afford either of those, of course, but they did try their luck with Goldberg several times over the years. They first pitched him in 2005 as they were about to start on Spike TV, with rumors a year later claiming that Big Billy was on his way in for a feud with Samoa Joe. There was mutual interest there, but they couldn't agree on terms, and talks quietened down for a few years. Then, during the Hogan-Bischoff era, they tried again, but Goldberg turned them down once more because he viewed the promotion as a minor league and didn't want to tarnish his legacy. Bill, I've got some bad news for you, mate. Anyway, one final push came in 2015, but also fell on deaf ears, and Goldberg was back in WWE not too long after, where he's managed to perfectly preserve his legacy.